Okay, so we are in Isaiah chapter 41. We finished chapter 40 last time, so we will be. Okay. So.
I'm in Bible study, so you'll need to call me sometime later. Okay? All right. Have a good rest of the day. Yeah, you too. Okay, bye. Bye. Bye, kids. She's not here. I'm at church. Bye.
Okay, so the chapter 41 seems to indicate that there is a level at which we are dealing with kind of a heavenly courtroom scene. Okay, so first verse, listen to me in silence, O coastlands. Let the peoples renew their strength. Let them approach, then let them speak. Let us together draw near for judgment. Okay, so what is kind of going on here is that God is calling both Israel and the other nations around them together to show who he is. Okay. And some of it is judgment in that we have judgment coming, but also just the idea of God's character, because that's the main thing that's going to come up. Okay. So then in verse 2, he begins with a set of questions. So the first question is, who stirred up one from the east, whom victory meets at every step? So he's bringing up the discussion here, and clearly what we're talking about is the Assyrian nation that is just kind of rampaged. Who stirred him up? Well, God did. Okay, he gives up nations before him so that he tramples kings underfoot. He makes them like dust with his sword and like driven stubble with his bow. He pursues them and passes on safely by paths his feet have not trod. So who is the one who stirred them up? And then the second question, who has performed and done this? So both questions are kind of the same thing. So who is the one who sent the armies against you all? Okay. I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am he. So the Lord sent them. Okay. So he's called the coastlands in verse 1, and he says, okay, so who stirred up the one who came and defeated you? Well, I did. And then the coastlands have seen and are afraid. The ends of the earth tremble. They have drawn near and come. Okay. Everyone helps his neighbor and says to his brother, be strong. Okay. But then in verse 7, we have this interesting moment because 7 is clearly referring to idols. Okay, so all the coastlands are saying, oh, be strong, trust in your idols. Because it says the craftsman strengthens the goldsmith, and he who smooths with the hammer, him who strikes the anvil. So here's the idea. The craftsman strengthens the one who works in gold, and the one who smooths. So one of the things you learn about metalsmithing is that there are several processes through it. Okay. So the one who strikes the anvil would be the blacksmith. Okay. And the one who smooths it's called plenishing, and it's smoothing out the metal. Okay. Saying of the soldering. So what they're making clearly is an idol. So the craftsman is helping the goldsmith, and the one who smooths the hammer is helping the blacksmith, saying of the work in the metal. So the soldering is, of course, joining them together. Oh, yeah, that looks good. And they strengthen it with nails so that it cannot be moved. So notice we've come up to this before, okay? That when we're talking about idols, we see this picture of a craftsman going through and building this idol. And then finally, whenever they're done with the idol and have it all done, they have to nail it to the mantle so that it doesn't fall off. Mm-hmm. Okay, so understand that part of what is going on is he's saying, look, I'm the one who stirred all this up. And yet the nations, those outside of Israel, are just going back to their idols. Well, we're going to get a little further into this, and it's going to discuss this a little more. But at this point, he's going to set apart Israel here in a minute. But as far as the coastlands, so it would be, Lebanon and Syria and Tyre and Sidon and all of those areas. They've just gone back to their idols. But in verse 8, then it goes, but you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend. Okay, so watch. But you, Israel, so the nation of Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, and then the offspring, those who are the children of my friend Abraham. So he uses 3 different descriptors for them. They're his servant Israel. They are Jacob, whom I have chosen. Now remember, Israel and Jacob are the same. Okay, Jacob is the one who becomes Israel. Okay. Now, we need to go in this because it is part of this discussion. Jacob was a trickster. Jacob was a pretty dishonest character. Okay. Israel actually means one who wrestles with God.
Jacob was the one who wrestled with God.
Right, but that's why he's called Israel, is because he wrestled with God. Okay. So he's using their names, but there is reason for this. The offspring of Abraham, my friend. So he calls Abraham his friend. You whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant. I have chosen you and have not cast you off. Okay. So notice he begins with this idea of listen and hear the evidence coming. And then 2 and 3, there's actually an interesting idea. It's building tension because it's implying or actually expressing that the enemy that came from the Lord. Okay. Then in verses 5 through 7, we see this kind of diluted idea of going back to idols. See, so all of that is very important to get into as we move forward because it is giving this idea that, remember, that you are different, Israel. Okay, you are not the same as these other nations, and you need to remember that. Okay, and in fact, in verse 10, it even goes this: fear not, for I am with you. Don't be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So here is the kind of the picture, and it's an important element to this. Because remember, idols are still coming up in all this. The other nations have to turn back to their idols in order to strengthen themselves. They have to pull up their courage by, well, we have these gods. Israel doesn't have to do that. They are the chosen of the one true God. And they say, don't be afraid. See, this whole idea of the craftsman strengthens the goldsmith, and even this idea in verse 6 of everyone helps his neighbor and says to his brother, be strong. They're all walking around with their knees trembling. Okay, you got to be strong, brother. But he's telling Israel, don't be afraid because you're not alone. I'm with you. Don't be dismayed. I'm your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you. I will be your strength. Okay, and then in verse 11, behold, all who are incensed against you shall be put to shame and confounded. Those who strive against you shall be as nothing and shall perish. So, the ones who are so angry with you, I'll take care of them. The ones who are fighting against you, I'll take care of them.
It's a good promise for right now.
Uh-huh. You shall look for those that contend with you, but you will not find them. Those who war against you shall be as nothing at all.
It's interesting to think that he told them, I'm the one that called them to come against you.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's telling them I'm going to take care of them.
Mm-hmm. So, but understand that this is one of those things that is kind of a major element within the discussion of how the Bible deals with Israel and God's relationship. There are times when Israel is faithful that God says, don't worry about anybody else. I'll take care of you. But when Israel falls into sin and falls out of relationship with the Father and is living in rebellion against the Father, then it is very clear that God will move to the point of, for the sake of his name, he will call other nations to punish Israel for their rebellion. So there is an element here that is going in on this. And it's important to understand that either way, God is watching out for his people. When they are being faithful, then he protects them. When they are being unfaithful, then like a father, he punishes them. He corrects them. See, and one thing you see in the Bible that is very clear and very important to understand is even in the moments where he is punishing them, he is still protecting them. So the best example of that comes out of Daniel. Because the entire book of Daniel, or at least the first 6 chapters of Daniel, take place under what condition in Israel? Or for the children of Israel? They're in exile.
Mm-hmm.
They're in exile because they're being punished by God for their sin. And yet, what do we see in every single chapter? We see God moving on behalf of his people in the midst of his punishment of his people. Because what happens in chapter 1 of Daniel? We have this moment where Daniel and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which I always think it's funny that we do this. So I'll explain this real quick. It's a discussion of the names. Okay. Daniel is, when we talk about him, he is talked about by his Hebrew name, which is Daniel. Okay. His Babylonian name that he is renamed is Belteshazzar. Okay. When we talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we use their Babylonian names. Their Hebrew names were Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael. That was their names. When they were sent to Babylon, and first of all, it's fairly clear to understand that all 4 of them were made into eunuchs. So they didn't have any children. Okay. But they were renamed. And it's interesting to understand the way this works because they were named under the names of the Babylonian gods. Each of the names of the 4 of them include a name that comes from a root of one of the Babylonian gods. So the purpose, and this is a very clear assessment of this situation, the purpose that Babylon was going for when they took them exile and made them into eunuchs and brought them into the palace was to remove their Jewish identity. Okay. So first of all, they made them unable to procreate. Okay. Then they renamed them to a Babylonian name that was in worship of their gods and not the God of, because remember, all four of them have a name that mentions the God of Israel. Okay. When you look at a Jewish name and it ends in the letters AH or EL, it is referring to the God of Israel in some way. Okay. All four of their names are changed to include the gods of Babylon. And then the other thing that happens in chapter 1 is as they are going through their schooling, and this is clearly what is going on, they have a period of time of a couple of years where they are forced, and it's a force is kind of how this works, to study Babylonian literature, Babylonian religion, Babylonian, all of those things. They are trained. So remember, the idea is that this group of four, are amongst a group of Jews and other captives who are the cream of the crop. They are the smartest, the wisest, the most. Okay, it's clear that is the issue here. And they are training them to serve the kingdom of Babylon as slaves, but they are taught the Babylonian customs and the Babylonian myths and the Babylonian all of that. And then they are also given a portion of Babylonian food and drink. They are provided with rich food, wine, all of the delicacies of Babylon. Well, what are they trying to do? They're trying to turn them Babylonian. They're trying to erase their heritage. So what Daniel and Daniel, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah do is, and it uses this in Daniel 1:8, it says, Daniel resolved not to defile himself. Okay, because the Babylonians would have not had the same dietary code as what the Hebrews did. They would have probably eaten pork, but probably more important is the majority of the meat would have been sacrificed to their idols. And so Daniel says, I refuse to eat the food that would be a denial of my religious heritage. And so he goes to the captain of the guard, who clearly God has given him favor with, and says, look, I can't eat this. So I could you please talk to the king? And the guy goes, no. If the king comes in and looks and sees that you guys look terrible and unhealthy, then it's going to be my head for not taking care of you. And Daniel goes, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. Test us for 10 days. Okay. You can give everybody else all the rich food and all the delicacies of the king, but we want vegetables and water. So we want you to give us.
They don't want no meat or anything.
Well, because all the meat would have been sacrificed to idols. So give us vegetables and water. Okay. And the guy goes, okay, we'll try it. Well, at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and them look better than all the rest. Now it's unclear. Some scholars think that they actually took away all the rich food from everybody and made everybody eat vegetables and water. But more likely, I would say, is that for the rest of that time, then the captain of the guard goes, well, then we'll keep it this way. Will you guys eat your vegetables and water? And they can have all the rich food and all of that. And we go forward. Well, before it's all over, when they come to the end of this testing period and when they come to the end of the training period, all four of them end up in high spots, because it says at the end of chapter 1 that they found that those four were smarter than everybody else. They were the best four. But out of that four, Daniel is kind of head and shoulders above everybody else. For one of the things is that he can interpret dreams. Okay. So then you come to chapter 2, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has a dream. And Daniel comes and he interprets the dream. And in fact, not only does he interpret the dream, it's such a cool story, because Nebuchadnezzar decides he's going to do something that nobody's ever done before. He goes, I don't want you guys to have the opportunity just to make something up. So not only do you have to tell me what the dream means, you have to tell me what the dream was. See, if you're really speaking the truth to me, then you should be able to, then God should give you, and he's talking to the Babylonians, so you're it's all the priests and all of that. He's saying your God should be able to tell you what I dreamed. And they're all freaking out. They're like, you can't ask us to do that. Tell us the dream and then we'll tell you what it means. Well, then they can just make something up. Well, so Daniel finally comes in. And by the way, at this point, all of the wise men, so Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all the other wise men, their lives are at stake because the king's so angry that no one's been able to do it. He's ready to kill all of them. And Daniel comes in and goes, look, I can't do it either, but my God can. So here's what you dreamed. And he tells him his dream. And he says, okay, now here's what it means. So Daniel ends up in the top 3 of the whole kingdom. You have Nebuchadnezzar, and then you have the 3 guys that are kind of just directly under him. And Daniel is first among those. And so we go forward and we watch all of this. And then we see the fiery furnace that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are unwilling to worship this idol that Nebuchadnezzar's brought forward. And what does God do? He protects them out of it. So the entire story is based out of these 4 men's lives, but they are a representation of what God is doing in the lives of all the Jews who have been sent off to exile. He has protected them. See, then you go forward a little bit, and Israel has now returned, and we have Ezra and Nehemiah, and we see God moving to do the rebuilding. And then suddenly we have this little aside story that takes us back into Persia, back into the land of the kings that they had spent exile in. And we see Esther. And we see a plot to eradicate the Jews. And we see God, although he's never actually mentioned in the book, the name of God is never once mentioned in the entire book of Esther. It is all anonymous as far as how God is moving. But God moves to a place where Mordecai ends up saving the king's life. And then his cousin becomes queen. And Mordecai finds out the plot. He goes to Esther and he says, you got to do something. And Esther decides to violate protocol and at risk of her life, go and talk to the king. And then suddenly in the middle of the night, the king can't sleep. And he goes, oh, I know what I can do. I'll have somebody come and read the books of my days. So literally this guy is saying, in order to go asleep, you're going to go, okay, 8:52 a.m. So-and-so came by and blah, 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 blah. And somewhere in the midst of that, it was at 12:32, Mordecai saves the king's life. Wait a minute. Did we do anything for Mordecai? I don't think so. Oh, well, we need to come up with something for Mordecai. Hey, Haman, who's the bad guy of the story. Hey, Haman, come here. So I've got this guy that I really want to reward because he did a great service to the kingdom. And what do you think we should do that would be just, a way to really show that we're happy with this guy? And Haman, in his arrogance, goes, oh, he's talking about me. And so he gives this big list of all this incredible thing. I think you should put him on a horse, maybe put him on your own horse at the head of a parade and have one of your advisors stand in front of him, hail this guy because he did something. He's so great. And suddenly the king goes, okay, do all that for Mordecai, who is Haman's arch enemy. Okay. And in the meantime, Haman has spent weeks building gallows to hang Mordecai. And in the beginning of this whole assault against the children of Israel. Well, so during this whole time, Esther has been making moves of her own. She invited the king and Haman to dinner once and had dinner with them and then said, hey, why don't you come back again tomorrow? And right in the middle of that comes the whole Mordecai thing. So Haman comes back the second night, probably not very happy because he's had to, bite his tongue about how he really feels about Mordecai all day. And suddenly the queen, who is beloved, it is absolutely clear that the king has fallen madly in love with her. Okay. She goes, I've got a problem, king. Oh, what is it? Well, there's this group of people that are threatening me and my people. And the king goes, who? I'll take care of them. And suddenly she goes, Haman. He made you sign an order against my people. Well, nobody knew she was Jewish. And so suddenly Haman is hung on the gallows he had built for Mordecai. And a decree goes out saying you can defend yourself, and the Jews defend themselves and wipe out all their enemies. Well, what is all of that? All of that is back to this discussion. You, O Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I'm chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, don't be afraid. I'm with you. Yes, I punished you, but it doesn't mean I've abandoned you. See, that's the important part of this, is that God is saying, even in the moments when I punish you, I haven't abandoned you. And that is often the dynamic that we see, or at least is a proposed dynamic. Another example is when Eli and his two sons are so, not really following God, and God is angry when Samuel is still a boy or a young man at this point. And remember, they go out to battle against the Philistines and they lose badly. And they go, oh, I know what we do. Let's take the ark because it's our magic device and it will give us victory. And instead, they get stomped even worse, and the Philistines end up with the ark. And you have this moment where Eli falls out of his chair and dies. He goes, what happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Said, well, it's been taken. And he's, and falls over and dies. Okay. And you see this character within it that suddenly comes up and it says Ichabod, this name. And it's a name that God has abandoned us, is kind of the idea. Okay. And that's where the chapter ends, is with this, the ark's gone. God has abandoned them.
What chapter is that?
I would have to go back and look.
Okay. That's okay.
But I'll look it up at the end of this. So then the very next verse says that the ark is then taken to the temple of the god Dagon, which is one of the Philistines' chief gods. Okay. Now, here's why I bring this up. Because there would have been a belief among the children of Israel, probably, that their defeat at the hands of the Philistines was God being defeated. Okay. So the book of Samuel stamps that out very quickly, because what happens is they bring the ark to the temple of Dagon. They put it inside their temple as a trophy, and it's sitting on the floor, and rising above it is Dagon, a statue of Dagon, their god. And they go to bed that night, and they get up the next morning, and Dagon is fallen off his plinth and is laying on his face before the ark of the Lord. Okay. And they go, must have gotten windy last night. They pick Dagon up.
Is Dagon a,
Dagon would be an idol.
okay,
It's the name of one of the Philistine gods, but the Dagon would have been a statue of Dagon.
okay.
So they pick the statue up and they set it back up and get it all ready again and go about their day. And that night they go to bed again, and they wake up the next morning and they find Dagon on the ground again. And this time his head and his hands have broken off. So he is prostrate before the ark, and his hands and his head have been severed. So completely humiliated. Okay. So a humiliating death. Well, about that time, just as this is going on, suddenly a huge plague sweeps over all of the Philistines. And it talks about boils. Okay. It clearly, in the way it's discussed, also caused all the men to become infertile. So suddenly no children are being born. All of that is going on, and they have these massive, painful boils, and it's just bad. And they go, well, what's going on? And they finally go, well, maybe it's because we have the ark. And so they go, okay, so we have the ark, but I really don't know if that's it. It could just be a normal thing, just a disease running through. Okay, a pestilence. So here's what we'll do. We'll take the ark, we'll put it on a cart. Okay, put the ark on a cart, and with it, we're going to put 5 golden images of the boils we've been having, and 5 golden images of the rats that have been rampaging. And that it just mainly mentions the boils, but clearly that was a rat infestation. So it's something like Black Plague, something carried by rats. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll go pull a mother ox out of the field who has just had a baby and has never pulled anything. Okay. So here's the picture. You have a female ox who has an unweaned baby, a baby that is still nursing. Okay. Well, where does that ox want to be most of all? With their baby. She's never been trained to pull, so she has nothing to do with that. That's not an issue at all. And he says, so they go, kind of a wise idea. They go, here's what we'll do. We'll hook her up and we'll let her go, and we'll see where she goes. If she goes right back to her baby, then we know it wasn't God. It was just, one of those things that happen sometimes. But if she heads towards Israel, we'll know it's God. Well, what does she do? She heads right to Israel. Mm-hmm. So what we see, and the reason that I bring this up, and I know we've gone through a couple of stories, is that Samuel, as he's writing, as the writer of Samuel and Kings is writing this, okay, a lot of people believe it's probably Isaiah who wrote it down. Okay, but as he's writing this, he goes, well, I know there's been this devastating defeat of Israel, but I want you to know that God hasn't been defeated. God is still undefeated. Israel was defeated because they were unfaithful. So God gave the enemies victory. God still accomplished his plan. Well, that is the idea here. Behold, all the people who are angry with you, they'll be put to shame and confounded, those who strive against you. So I'm the Lord your God. I hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, fear not. I am the one who helps you. So even when it gets bad, God is still on their side. There may be punishment, but God is still on their side. So then in verse 14 of Isaiah 41, it says, "Fear not, you worm Jacob." And I think it's funny that they use this idea of worm, but it's basically saying that, look, don't think it's because you're so incredible, you men of Israel. I am the one who helps you, declares the Lord. Your Redeemer, okay, and remember what Redeemer means. It's your purchaser, the one who has bought you, okay, is the Holy One of Israel. Behold, I make of you a threshing sledge, new, sharp, and having teeth. You shall thresh the mountains and crush them, and you shall make the hills like chaff. You shall winnow them, and the wind shall carry them away, and the tempest shall scatter them, and you shall rejoice in the Lord, in the Holy One of Israel you shall glory. I will bring you victory. I will make you. You will have victory because I made you have victory. Okay, very important that we understand this idea. Okay, so then it goes on. When the poor and needy seek water and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. So when you're in serious trouble and you need water and you can't find any, I will take care of it. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open up rivers on the bare heights and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water and the dry land springs of water. I will put in the wilderness the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle, and the olive. I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane, and the pine together, that you may see and know, may consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this. The Holy One of Israel has created it. So it's a discussion of the faithfulness of God for his people, even in their distress. Okay. And then in verse 21, we have a case. So remember, we talked about the fact that we're in a case here. So in verse 21, it says, "Set forth your case, says the Lord. Bring your proofs, says the God of the King of Jacob. Let them bring them and tell us what is to happen. Tell us the former things, what they are, that we may consider them, that we may know their outcome, or declare to us the things to come." So he's speaking once again to the nations. He said, "Okay, you nations that follow idols, why don't you come and tell us what's going to happen? Why don't you come and prophesy? Why don't you come and prove that your gods are real?" Okay. Tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are good gods. Do good or do harm, that we may be dismayed and terrified. Behold, you are nothing. And your works are less than nothing. An abomination is he who chooses you. So, okay, all you idols, prove your power. Well, you don't have any. Okay. Verse 25, "I stirred up one from the north, and he has come from the rising of the sun, and he shall call upon my name. He shall trample on rulers as on mortar, as the potter treads clay." Okay, so let's make sure we understand. Okay, so a potter in that day, when you would go to make a new pot, what you would do is you would trample on old pots, and you would crush down the old pottery to where it was a sand or a dust, and then you could add water and make new clay for the pottery. Okay, So it was a way to make more pottery, as you could destroy the old pottery and remake it. Okay. So I've stirred up one. Okay, and he shall trample. Then in verse 26, we move in this. It says, who declared it from the beginning that we might know, and beforehand that we might say, he is right. There was none who declared it, none who proclaimed, none who heard your words. Okay. I was the first to say to Zion, behold, here they are. And I give to Jerusalem a herald of good news. But when I look, there is none among them is there. I look, there is no one. Among them there is no counselor, who when I ask gives an answer. Behold, they are all a delusion. Their works are nothing. Their metal images are empty wind. So God says, I've raised someone up. So who knew that I was going to do that? Who figured that out? Who knew that I was going to do something like this? No one.
So who's speaking?
God is speaking. Okay. This entire chapter is God speaking.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I stirred up one against you. Okay. And by the way, if we want to look at this, it's not completely clear how this works, but it is possible that some of this is the discussion of Josiah, because if you'll remember, there comes a point, probably not just Josiah, but there comes a point where Josiah, when he becomes king, he goes out and destroys all the pagan altars. Okay. Not positive that that's the idea, but that certainly could be part of it. There could be some messianic elements to it, but the idea here, in a very important way, is that none of these people who are dealing with idols recognized what was going to happen. Okay, that was not, they did not understand. They did not get. And so that is an important element, this. Okay. One of the commentaries titles this last section, both from 21 to 29, the gods are the gods are impotent, but God controls history. Okay. There is a real element to that is they are worthless. The idols are worthless. Okay. Let me see. I was going to see what it. Sorry, I was looking at something real quick. So, but anyway, the ultimate implication here is this: that when God moves, the idols are powerless to. Okay. Now, when we move to chapter 42, which we will wait till Wednesday to do, we'll stop here. We are going to begin a discourse that involves the servant. Okay. And what we're going to find fairly quickly is that the servant is clearly, and there's some places where it'll be different, but the Spirit is Jesus. Okay. So I'll give you the first couple verses and I'll show. Behold, my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my Spirit upon him, and he will bring forth justice to the nations. Okay. Now, I say this to make sure we understand. There will be some places where it will not, where the servant will be pulled in some other, and you could bring some other people in. But in all honesty, chapter 42 begins this servant idea, and the servant is Jesus. And it comes kind of to a conclusion, or at least to a culmination in chapter 53, where we suddenly see the suffering servant.
That's Jesus also.
Right.
Crucifixion.
That is part of it, yes. But this entire section from 42 to about 53, 54, I don't actually remember exactly where it sits at the end, but this servant is Jesus. It is his ministry. It is his movement. Okay. And some of the most beautiful imagery comes out of this. 42:3 goes, a bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. So he's mild and he's merciful and he's loving. Okay. So you will see this idea as we move forward into 42 of the servant. All right, we will stop.